Historians enlarged. This 1865 image, what appeared beneath the enslaved servant's bracelet, changed everything. Dr. Jennifer Washington had spent 3 years cataloging Civil War photographs for the National Archives when she found the image that would redefine her career. It arrived in a box of uncatalogued materials from a recently acquired private collection, wrapped in acid-free paper and labeled simply Virginia Household, April 1865. The photograph showed the interior of a wealthy home, with a white family seated in their parlor, while an enslaved woman stood in the background near a doorway, a silver tray balanced in her hands. What caught Jennifer's attention was the date. April 1865 meant this photograph was taken in the final days of the Confederacy, perhaps even after Lee's surrender at Appomattox. The timing alone made it significant, but something else drew her eye. The enslaved woman wore an elaborate brass bracelet on her left wrist, highly unusual for someone in her position. Most enslaved people wore no jewelry at all, or at most simple iron bands. This bracelet was decorative, intricate, and seemed deliberately positioned to be visible in the photograph. Jennifer examined the image under magnification. The photograph's quality was exceptional for the period, with remarkable clarity in the background details. The woman appeared to be in her 30s with a dignified bearing despite her servile position. Her face was partially turned away from the camera, but her posture suggested alertness, awareness. The bracelet caught the light, its surface reflecting the photographer's lamp with unusual brightness. The accompanying documentation was sparse. The collection had come from the estate of a Virginia judge who had accumulated Civil War materials throughout his life. There were no names, no locations beyond Virginia, no context to explain who these people were or why this particular moment had been preserved. Jennifer made a note to pursue the photograph's provenance, but first she wanted to create a high-resolution digital scan for the archives. She scheduled time in the imaging lab, carefully transporting the fragile photograph in its protective sleeve. Something about the image unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite articulate. The woman's stance, the bracelet, the specific timing, it all felt intentional, as though the photograph itself was trying to communicate something across the gulf of time. 2 weeks later, Jennifer met with Dr. Raymond Chen, the archive's senior digital imaging specialist. Raymond had pioneered techniques for extracting hidden details from historical photographs, using a combination of multispectral imaging and advanced enhancement algorithms. He had revealed faded text in documents, uncovered obscured faces in crowd scenes, and brought clarity to thousands of degraded images. Jennifer explained what she wanted: maximum resolution, particularly focused on the enslaved woman and the bracelet she wore. Raymond set up the photograph under specialized lighting, using multiple wavelengths to capture information invisible to the naked eye. Infrared imaging revealed underlying layers, while ultraviolet light exposed surface details lost to time and degradation. The process took 6 hours, with Raymond making minute adjustments to lighting angles and exposure times. Jennifer watched the monitor as layer after layer of data accumulated, building a digital reconstruction of the original image with unprecedented clarity. As the enhanced image appeared on screen, details emerged that had been invisible in the physical photograph. The texture of fabrics became distinct, the grain of wooden furniture visible, and most dramatically, the faces of all the people in the room grew sharper and more defined. The white family members' expressions became readable: tension in the mother's jaw, exhaustion in the father's eyes, uncertainty in the children's faces. This was a family in crisis, Jennifer realized, captured at the moment their world was collapsing. But it was the enslaved woman who commanded attention as the enhancement progressed. Her face, previously obscured by shadow and age-related fading, revealed intelligent eyes that seemed to look directly at something outside the frame. Not at the camera, Jennifer noted, but at something or someone else in the room. Her expression was complex, neither subservient nor openly defiant, but watchful, calculating. The image suggested a woman who was present in the room, but operating on a different plane of awareness. Raymond began working on the bracelet, enhancing the metal surface with specialized filters. As he increased the contrast and sharpness, something unexpected appeared. The bracelet wasn't simply decorative. Beneath it, visible now in the enhanced image, was what appeared to be a mark on the woman's skin. Raymond zoomed in, adjusting the image parameters. Jennifer leaned closer to the screen, her breath catching as the mark's nature became clear. It was a scar, deliberately shaped, and it had been carefully hidden beneath the bracelet's band. The scar was approximately 2 inches long, burned into the skin of the woman's inner wrist. Raymond enhanced the image further, using edge detection algorithms to trace its exact shape. What emerged was unmistakable, a deliberate pattern, not the random marking of an accident or punishment, but a specific symbol. It resembled a small key, its shaft straight and its bit formed by 3 distinct notches. The precision was remarkable, suggesting it had been created with care despite the crude method of burning. Jennifer had studied slave narratives, plantation records, and abolitionist documents for years, but she had never encountered references to enslaved people marking themselves with symbols. Branding by enslavers was well documented, a brutal practice used to mark ownership. But self-inflicted symbolic scarring? That suggested something else entirely, a form of communication, identification, or resistance that had escaped historical documentation. She photographed the enhanced image and began researching. University libraries, digital archives, historical societies. Jennifer searched through every resource available. She found references to enslaved people using quilts, songs, and verbal codes to communicate, but nothing about deliberate scarification as a marker. The symbol itself appeared nowhere in her research, not in military records, not in plantation documents, not in abolitionist literature. Raymond suggested they search for other photographs in the archives collection that might contain similar marks. It was a daunting task. The collection contained over 200,000 Civil War-era images, but modern facial recognition and pattern-matching software made it feasible. They created a search algorithm specifically designed to identify brass bracelets and similar wrist coverings in photographs of enslaved or recently freed black individuals. 3 days later, the algorithm returned its results. Of the 200,000 images, it had identified 47 photographs showing enslaved or freed people wearing bracelets, bands, or cloth wrappings around their wrists. Jennifer began examining each one, requesting high-resolution enhancement for any that showed promise. The work was painstaking and often disappointing. Most bracelets concealed nothing, worn simply as adornment or to cover scars from shackles or plantation punishments. But on the 12th photograph, taken in South Carolina in 1864, she found it. An elderly woman standing in a group of freed people wore a simple cloth band around her wrist. In the enhanced image, visible beneath a gap in the fabric, was the same symbol, a key with 3 notches. Jennifer's hands trembled as she logged the discovery. This wasn't an isolated case. It was part of something larger, something organized. Jennifer assembled a research team, 2 graduate students specializing in African American history, a pattern recognition specialist, and a forensic anthropologist who had experience analyzing historical scarification practices. Together, they began a systematic examination of every photograph in the archives collection that might contain hidden markers. The work consumed 3 months, with team members analyzing images late into the night, cross-referencing findings, and building a database of potential matches. By the end of the first month, they had identified 11 photographs showing variations of the key symbol. The marks appeared on men and women, young and old, in photographs taken across Virginia, Maryland, South Carolina, and Georgia between 1863 and 1866. Some marks were clearly visible, proudly displayed. Others were carefully hidden beneath bracelets, cloth bands, or positioned to avoid the camera's eye. The variety of concealment strategies suggested that the marks meant different things in different contexts, sometimes safe to show, other times dangerous to reveal. The forensic anthropologist, Dr. Patricia Morris, analyzed the scars' characteristics. All had been created using heated metal, likely a nail or similar implement. The consistency of the symbol's proportions across different examples suggested a shared template or instruction. Most significantly, Patricia determined that the marks had been created intentionally and carefully, not in haste or under duress. These were deliberate acts of self-identification, created with purpose and precision despite the pain involved. The team expanded their research beyond photographs, searching plantation records for any mention of scarring, branding, or marks on enslaved workers. In the ledgers of a Maryland plantation, they found an overseer's complaint dated 1863. 3 of the housewomen discovered with marks upon their arms, claimed to be burns from kitchen accidents, but marks appear identical, watching for signs of conspiracy. The entry was brief and dismissive, but it confirmed what Jennifer suspected. Enslavers had noticed these marks, but had not understood their significance. In South Carolina Freedmen's Bureau records, they found testimony from a formerly enslaved woman named Hannah, interviewed in 1865. Asked about her plans for the future, Hannah had mentioned, "finding my key sisters." The interviewer had noted the phrase but not pursued its meaning. Jennifer felt a chill reading those words. Key sisters. Not just a symbol, but an identity. Not just individuals, but a network. The team created a map plotting every confirmed sighting of the key symbol. A pattern emerged. The marks clustered along certain routes and near specific cities: Richmond, Charleston, Baltimore, Savannah. These were major urban centers where enslaved people worked in houses, hotels, and businesses, with more mobility than field workers. These were places where information could flow, where people could meet and communicate, where resistance could organize away from the constant surveillance of plantation life. Following the geographic pattern, Jennifer requested archival access to plantation records, insurance claims, and military reports from the areas where the key symbols had appeared. She was searching for evidence of the network's activities, assuming that an organized group would leave traces in the historical record even if those traces had been misinterpreted at the time. What she found exceeded her expectations and fundamentally changed her understanding of Civil War history. Insurance records from Virginia plantations between 1861 and 1865 documented an epidemic of inexplicable accidents. Fires broke out in barns and storage facilities with suspicious frequency. Equipment broke at critical moments during harvest. Preserved food spoiled despite proper storage. Mills experienced mechanical failures that defied explanation. In each case, plantation owners blamed enslaved workers' carelessness or incompetence, never suspecting organized sabotage. But when Jennifer plotted these incidents on her map, they clustered precisely in areas where the key symbols appeared. Military records provided even more striking evidence. Confederate Army correspondence from 1863 and 1864 frequently mentioned supply problems traced to plantations where provisions were prepared for troop support. Food shipments arrived spoiled. Uniforms were improperly sewn and fell apart in the field. Medical supplies were contaminated. In one letter, a Confederate quartermaster wrote furiously about the incompetence of household servants who cannot perform the simplest tasks without ruining everything they touch. Reading between the lines, Jennifer saw not incompetence but sophisticated resistance. Women using their positions in houses and workrooms to undermine the Confederate war effort. The most compelling evidence came from a Confederate Provost Marshal's report from Richmond in 1864. The document described an investigation into suspected communication between household servants and Union sympathizers. The marshal had interrogated several enslaved women working in prominent Confederate officials' homes, suspecting them of passing military information to Northern agents. The investigation had been inconclusive, with the marshal noting frustration that these women maintain such perfect ignorance that one cannot determine if they are genuinely simple or remarkably cunning. Jennifer found the arrest record for one of those women. Her name was Celia, age 34, property of a Confederate colonel. The physical description noted a brass bracelet worn on the left wrist, which the subject refused to remove despite orders. The record indicated Celia had been released after 3 days with no charges filed, returning to her enslaver's household. Jennifer cross-referenced the date and location with her photograph database. 3 months later, a photograph taken in Richmond showed a woman wearing a brass bracelet, standing in the background of a family portrait. The facial features matched the description in the arrest record. Jennifer sat back, the pieces falling into place. This network of women had operated throughout the Civil War, using their positions in Confederate households to gather intelligence, sabotage war supplies, and undermine the system from within. They had marked themselves with a symbol of their mission, a key, suggesting they saw themselves as unlocking the chains of bondage, opening doors to freedom, and they had been so effective, so subtle in their methods, that their resistance had been attributed to incompetence rather than recognized as the organized warfare it was. The arrest record provided Jennifer with a crucial starting point. Celia's full name was Celia Harrison, taking the surname of the colonel who enslaved her. With a name and location, the team could trace her path through Freedmen's Bureau records, church registries, and census data. The search took weeks, following fragmentary trails through the chaos of the war's end and Reconstruction's turbulent beginning. They found her first in the 1866 Virginia census, living in Richmond as a free woman, working as a laundress. The census taker had noted her age as 36 and her occupation, but nothing else. City directory listings from 1867 and 1868 confirmed her continued presence in Richmond, with an address on Clay Street in a neighborhood where formerly enslaved people had established a thriving community. Then the trail went cold. After 1868, Celia Harrison disappeared from official records. Jennifer's graduate student Marcus suggested searching black newspapers from the period. The Richmond Planet, founded in 1883, had occasionally published reminiscences and obituaries of notable community members. Working through digitized archives, Marcus found a brief obituary from 1897. Celia Harrison, aged 67, passed to her eternal rest. A founding member of the Richmond Ladies Benevolent Society and faithful servant of her community. The obituary mentioned survivors, a daughter, Elizabeth, and 3 grandchildren, but provided no other details. The Richmond Ladies Benevolent Society had been a mutual aid organization, one of hundreds founded by black women during Reconstruction to provide support for their communities. Jennifer requested the society's records from the Virginia Historical Society. What arrived was a collection of meeting minutes, membership rolls, and correspondence spanning from 1867 to 1920. The minutes were detailed, documenting the society's charitable work, fundraising efforts, and community organizing. In the earliest minutes, dated May 1867, Jennifer found a reference that made her pulse quicken. The society's founding members had established a ritual for new members, described obliquely, "Sisters shall bear the mark of service upon their person, signifying their dedication to the uplift of their people and the remembrance of those who came before." The phrasing was careful, revealing nothing directly, but Jennifer understood immediately. The society had been founded by women who bore the key symbol, who had brought their tradition of organized resistance forward into freedom. Celia Harrison's name appeared throughout the society's records, always in context suggesting leadership and organizing. She had led fundraising for schools, coordinated support for indigent families, and advocated for women's education. In 1872, the minutes recorded her speech at the Society's anniversary celebration. "We who survived the darkness must carry forward the light. We who found keys to unlock our chains must open doors for those who come after." The metaphor was clear now, no longer hidden but celebrated in the safety of their own community. Jennifer found Elizabeth, Celia's daughter, listed as a society member beginning in 1885. The membership roll noted that Elizabeth was marked in the tradition during a ceremony in 1886 at age 30. The tradition had been passed forward from those who had resisted during slavery to a new generation who would carry the symbol's meaning into a different kind of struggle. With Celia's story established, Jennifer expanded her research to identify other women in the Richmond network. The Ladies Benevolent Society's membership rolls from 1867 listed 43 founding members. Jennifer cross-referenced these names with her database of photographs showing the key symbol, with Freedmen's Bureau records, and with other documentary sources. Gradually, a collective portrait emerged of the women who had organized resistance in Richmond during the war, and then built community institutions in its aftermath. Many of the founding members had worked in prominent Confederate households during the war. Hannah, whose mention of key sisters had provided an early clue, had been enslaved by a Confederate congressman. Sarah had worked in the household of Richmond's mayor. Rachel had served in the home of a senior military officer. These positions had given them access to information and resources, which they had used strategically to undermine the Confederate cause while appearing to serve it loyally. The team found evidence of how the network had operated. Plantation records and wartime correspondence revealed patterns. Confederate officials whose households employed these women experienced unusually high rates of accidents and mistakes. Documents went missing, conversations were overheard, and information leaked. Food prepared for important meetings made guests ill. Uniforms intended for soldiers arrived damaged. Each incident was plausibly deniable, attributable to carelessness or incompetence, but taken together they formed a pattern of deliberate sabotage. Jennifer discovered a particularly striking example in the papers of Confederate Secretary of War James Seddon. His household accounts from 1863 documented the dismissal of 3 enslaved workers after repeated incidents of negligence. One of those workers was listed as Celia. Jennifer found the record of her transfer to Colonel Harrison's household, where the arrest record had later documented her presence. Rather than ending her activities, the transfer had simply moved her to a different position where she could continue her work. The network's communication methods became clearer through careful analysis of the evidence. The women had used their mobility as household servants to pass information. When sent on errands, They had met and coordinated. Church services had provided another gathering point, with black churches serving as centers for covert organizing. The brass bracelets themselves had functioned as identification, allowing women to recognize each other and establish trust. The hidden symbol had been both badge and promise. I am part of this. I am committed. I will not betray you. Dr. Morris, the forensic anthropologist, made another significant discovery. Analyzing the enhanced photographs more carefully, she noted that the key symbols varied slightly in their details. Some had 3 notches, others 4. Some had curved shafts, others straight. These variations weren't accidental, she argued, but encoded information. The symbol might have indicated not just membership in the network, but specific roles, locations, or specializations. The women had created a visual language, hiding their organizational structure in marks on their own bodies. Jennifer realized they were documenting something unprecedented. Historians had long known that enslaved people resisted their bondage through various means: work slowdowns, equipment sabotage, escape, and rebellion. But this evidence suggested a level of organization and strategic coordination that had not been previously recognized. The Key Sisters had operated a resistance network throughout the Civil War, using their positions in Confederate households to conduct economic and intelligence warfare while maintaining perfect covers as loyal servants. As the team documented the Richmond network, Jennifer wondered about geographic scope. The key symbols had appeared in photographs from multiple states. Was this a single coordinated network or independent groups using similar methods? The answer came from an unexpected source: the papers of Sarah Bradford, a white abolitionist who had worked with Harriet Tubman during the war. Among Bradford's correspondence, preserved at Syracuse University, Jennifer found a letter dated December 1863. Bradford described a meeting with several colored women from Richmond who had provided information about Confederate troop movements and supply conditions. The letter noted that these women bore a particular mark upon their arms, which they said identified them as servants of liberation. Bradford had been impressed by their courage and organization, but had written nothing more about the network's structure or methods. This connection to Harriet Tubman's intelligence network was the breakthrough Jennifer needed. Tubman had worked for the Union Army as a scout and spy, coordinating intelligence gathering throughout Confederate territory. If the Key Sisters had been part of that network, there might be documentation in Union military records. Jennifer requested files from the War Department's intelligence operations, focusing on reports from Virginia and South Carolina during 1863-1865. What she found was fragmentary but revealing. Union intelligence reports frequently mentioned information provided by loyal colored women in Confederate households. The report's language was dismissive, treating these women as passive sources rather than active agents, but the information they provided had been remarkably detailed and accurate. Reports on Confederate troop strengths, supply conditions, and military plans had flowed steadily from Richmond, Charleston, and other cities to Union intelligence officers. The women providing this information had risked their lives, knowing that discovery meant torture and execution. In one report from 1864, a Union intelligence officer noted, "Our sources within enemy households demonstrate remarkable consistency in their reports, suggesting coordination and discipline unusual in such circumstances." The officer had attributed this to luck rather than organization, but Jennifer understood differently. The Key Sisters had been coordinating their intelligence gathering, comparing information, and ensuring accurate reporting. They had functioned as an organized spy network, hiding their sophisticated operations behind masks of servility and ignorance. The team found evidence of the network's reach beyond Virginia. In Charleston, military records documented the arrest in 1865 of 3 black women accused of giving aid and comfort to the enemy by providing information to Union forces. All 3 had been released after Union occupation, with no charges pursued. Jennifer cross-referenced the names with her photograph database. 2 of the 3 appeared in photographs showing brass bracelets. The third appeared in an image where her wrist was visible, bearing the key symbol without concealment, photographed after liberation, wearing her mark with pride. Jennifer contacted Gwendolyn Harris, a historian at the University of South Carolina, who specialized in slavery and resistance in the Low Country. Gwendolyn had studied maroon communities, slave rebellions, and escape networks, and she immediately grasped the significance of Jennifer's findings. She shared her own research on patterns of sabotage on South Carolina rice plantations, where accidental flooding and equipment failures had devastated crops intended to feed Confederate armies. Plotting these incidents against Jennifer's map of key symbol sightings showed clear correlation. Together, they began to see the full scope. The Key sisters had operated across state lines, coordinating their activities through a network that stretched from Maryland to Georgia. They had used their positions to gather intelligence, sabotage Confederate war efforts, and prepare for freedom. They had been soldiers in the war against slavery, fighting from within enemy territory using weapons of deception, information, and strategic resistance. 6 months into the research, Jennifer received an email from a genealogist in Philadelphia named Diane Brooks. Diane had been researching her family history and had come across Jennifer's published preliminary findings about the key symbols. Diane's great-great-grandmother had been named Celia Brooks, formerly Harrison, who had moved from Richmond to Philadelphia in 1899. Among the family papers Diane possessed was a memoir Celia had written in the 1890s, intended for her grandchildren. It had never been published, merely typed and bound, passed down through the family. Diane offered to share it with Jennifer. The memoir arrived as a PDF, 93 pages of typescript that someone had painstakingly created from Celia's handwritten original. Jennifer began reading with trembling hands, knowing she was about to hear the story in Celia's own words. The memoir opened with Celia's childhood in slavery, her separation from her mother when sold at age 12, her training as a house servant. The early pages were painful but familiar, echoing narratives Jennifer had read in other slave testimonies. Then came 1862 and everything changed. Celia described a moment in Richmond when a woman she knew only as Sister Jane had approached her in the market. Jane had spoken carefully, testing Celia's sympathies, gauging her courage. Finally, Jane had shown Celia the mark on her own wrist, explaining its meaning. "We are the ones who carry keys. We open doors. We unlock chains. We set our people free." Jane had invited Celia to join their circle, warning her of the dangers, but promising her meaningful purpose. Celia described the initiation ceremony in vivid detail. 6 women had gathered in a cellar room, late at night, when their enslavers believed them asleep. The eldest, a woman named Mother Ruth who bore scars from brutal punishments, had explained the network's history and mission. They were not the first, Ruth said. Women had been organizing resistance for years, passing their methods and symbols forward through generations. The key symbol represented their purpose: to unlock the prison of slavery through intelligence, sabotage, and preparation for freedom. The ceremony's climax had come when Ruth heated an iron nail and burned the key symbol into Celia's wrist. Celia described the pain but also the pride, the sense of belonging to something larger than herself. The other women had held her hands, singing softly to cover any sound she might make. Afterward, Ruth had given her a brass bracelet, explaining how to use it to hide the mark when necessary and how to display it subtly when identifying herself to other key sisters. Celia's memoir detailed her activities during the war. She described passing information about Confederate military plans, gleaned from conversations she overheard while serving dinner. She explained how she had deliberately ruined batches of preserved food intended for Confederate hospitals, using subtle methods that made spoilage seem natural. She recounted late-night meetings where the women had shared intelligence and coordinated their efforts, always careful, always aware that discovery meant death. Most significantly, Celia wrote about the network's sophisticated organization. The variations in the key symbols had indeed encoded information, as Dr. Morris had theorized. 3 notches indicated membership in the Richmond Circle. 4 notches meant the Charleston Network. A curved shaft identified women who worked in military households and gathered intelligence. A straight shaft marked those who focused on economic sabotage. The women had created a visual organizational chart, hiding it in plain sight on their own bodies where their enslavers saw only scars or decoration. The memoir's final chapters described the war's end and the key sisters' transition to freedom. They had emerged from slavery with organizational skills, leadership experience, and networks of trust. They had founded the Richmond Ladies Benevolent Society and similar organizations in other cities, continuing their work of liberation through education, mutual aid, and community building. The key symbol had evolved from marker of covert resistance to badge of honor, passed to a new generation who would fight different battles for freedom and equality. Jennifer's research culminated in a landmark exhibition at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. titled The Key Sisters, Hidden Soldiers of Freedom. The exhibition displayed the original 1865 photograph alongside dozens of others showing women who bore the key symbol. Enhanced images revealed the scars in stunning detail. Documents, letters, and Celia's memoir provided context and testimony. A map showed the network's geographic reach. Interactive displays explained the women's methods and their impact on the Confederate war effort. The exhibition's centerpiece was a display of brass bracelets, some original artifacts and others recreations based on photographs. Visitors could see how the bracelets had functioned as both concealment and identification, protecting the women while allowing them to recognize each other. The display included testimony from descendants of key sisters, women whose great-grandmothers had carried these symbols and whose families had passed down stories of resistance and courage. Jennifer presented her findings at conferences and published a comprehensive study. Her research fundamentally challenged previous understandings of Civil War resistance and Black women's agency. Rather than passive victims or occasional rebels, the Key Sisters had been strategic actors, conducting sophisticated intelligence and economic warfare against the Confederacy. Their story demonstrated that resistance took many forms, some loud and public, but others quiet and sustained, hidden in plain sight while inflicting real damage on the system of oppression. Gwendolyn Harris coordinated complementary research in South Carolina, documenting the Charleston Network and its connections to other resistance movements. Together, they estimated that at least 200 women had been part of the Key Sister networks across the South, with likely many more whose marks had gone unrecorded or whose stories had been lost. The economic impact of their sabotage had been substantial, contributing to the Confederate supply shortages that helped end the war. The exhibition traveled to Richmond, Charleston, and Atlanta, drawing enormous crowds. In Richmond, Diane Brooks attended with her family, bringing Celia's original handwritten memoir to display temporarily. At the opening reception, she met descendants of other Key Sisters, women whose great-grandmothers had known Celia, had borne the same symbol, had fought the same covert war. They held hands as they looked at the photographs, at the enhanced images showing the key symbols their ancestors had worn with such courage and pride. For Jennifer, the project had become more than academic research. It had become an act of recovery and restoration, pulling these women from the margins of history where they had been deliberately erased. The Confederate officials whose households they had undermined had never understood what was happening. The Union officers who had used their intelligence had rarely credited them. The historians who had written about the Civil War had overlooked their contribution, but now, through careful analysis of photographs and documents, their story was finally told. The key symbol itself became iconic, adopted by organizations focused on Black women's history and contemporary resistance movements. Artists incorporated it into paintings and sculptures. Scholars used Jennifer's research methods to search for other hidden networks and unrecognized acts of resistance. The exhibition's catalog became a bestseller, with Celia's memoir published for the first time for public audiences. On the exhibition's one-year anniversary, Jennifer returned to stand before the original 1865 photograph. The woman whose bracelet had hidden a revolutionary symbol now stood revealed in her full humanity and agency. She was no longer an anonymous servant in the background, but Celia Harrison, spy, saboteur, organizer, liberator. The key she had carried, burned into her own flesh, had indeed unlocked doors, not just for herself, but for everyone who came after, opening pathways to freedom that continued to widen with each generation. The photograph had kept its secret for over 150 years, waiting for technology and determination to reveal what lay beneath the surface. Now that secret was shared, celebrated, and remembered. The Key Sisters had succeeded beyond anything they could have imagined, their resistance ultimately helping to destroy the system that had enslaved them and their courage inspiring new generations to continue the work of liberation they had begun. Their marks, once hidden, now shone with the light of recognition and honor they had always deserved.